I never imagined that, at 62 years old, the only human warmth I would feel would come from hands hired by the hour in a climate-controlled room. It wasn't just the back pain or the tension stiffening my neck like an old rusted iron bar. It was the absolute silence of my life being broken by the breathing of someone who, for a brief moment, was there just for me, even if it was a paid service. Before I tell you how a simple touch dismantled my entire empire of solitude, I invite you to follow the channel Forbidden Romances to follow this and other stories of transformation. My name is Eleanor Vance, and if you saw me on the street, you would see a woman who seemingly defeated time and life. I am 62 years old. I have 2 adult children living overseas, 2 litigious divorces, and a face that the best surgeons on Park Avenue maintain with artistic precision. My life is a catalog of material conquests, from the imported marble in my kitchen to the armored German SUV in the garage. But inside that golden armor, there is a constant cold that no cashmere coat can warm. My mornings are timed to the second, filled with board meetings that could be emails and charity teas where we pretend to care about the world while showing off jewelry. I live in a silence so absolute that I can hear the hum of the wine fridge in the middle of the night in my empty mansion in Greenwich. My children visit me the way one visits a historical museum, with respect, by appointment, but without touching anything, anxious to leave. That rainy Tuesday afternoon, the pain in my shoulders was unbearable, a knot of tension that seemed to carry the weight of all my bad decisions. It wasn't just common muscle pain. It was the accumulation of decades of maintaining a rigid posture, never letting anyone see me crumble or cry. I ordered my driver to take me immediately to the most exclusive spa on the Upper East Side, seeking the only relief my money promised to buy. I walked into the reception, dragging my designer bag like a shield, ignoring the rehearsed smiles of the receptionists, who already knew my difficult and demanding temperament. I hated that place as much as I needed it, with its cloying smell of artificial lavender and that ambient music that only increased my irritation. I just wanted someone to take away the pain with technical efficiency, without personal questions, without intimacy, just the service rendered. But when I arrived at the private room reserved for VIP clients, my usual therapist was not there to receive me with her cold, standardized courtesy. In her place was a young woman I had never seen, organizing the white towels with a care that seemed almost religious, her back to me. I stopped in the doorway, ready to complain to management, ready to demand the impeccable service for which I paid a monthly fortune. She turned slowly, and the complaint died in my throat before it was even born, leaving me momentarily stunned. She couldn't have been more than 22 years old, with straight black hair falling over her shoulders like a waterfall of shining ink. Her skin was a light bronze tone that seemed to hold the sun I hadn't felt in years, a mix of features that created an exuberant and natural beauty. What struck me most were her eyes, honey-colored, shining with a serenity that contrasted violently with my internal chaos and my haste. She didn't look at me with the fear or submission I was used to receiving from all my domestic staff. She looked at me with curiosity, a direct and deep gaze that seemed to pierce through my designer clothes and see the tired, lonely woman underneath it all. She smiled, a simple, unpretentious smile that caused a strange arrhythmia in my chest, something I hadn't felt in a long time. She said, "Good afternoon, Mrs. Vance. My name is Jasmine, and I'm going to take care of you today," with a soft, melodious voice. There was a musicality in the way she pronounced my name that made it seem less like a title of power and more like a forgotten identity. I swallowed hard, adjusting my glasses to re-establish a safe distance, trying to recover my posture as a dissatisfied, superior client. I replied dryly that I hoped she had strong hands, as I was not in the mood for gentleness on that gray day. I wanted to intimidate her. I wanted to push her away, because something in the luminous presence of that girl made me feel dangerously exposed and vulnerable. Jasmine just nodded, maintaining that disturbing calm, and indicated the massage table with a graceful, welcoming gesture. As I lay down and closed my eyes, expecting the generic touch I was used to, I didn't know my life was about to be dismantled. I didn't know those young hands were about to touch not just my aging skin, but the frozen winter of my soul. I lay on that padded table with the stiffness of a corpse being prepared for a wake, unable to relax my back muscles. I closed my eyes and waited for the strong smell of camphor and the mechanical, impersonal, rushed touch I was used to in previous sessions. I was counting the minutes mentally, just wanting the physical pain to go away so I could return to my empty, safe routine. However, when Jasmine's hands settled on my shoulders for the first time, my breath caught in my throat out of pure astonishment. There was no cold shock of cream or the brute pressure of someone wanting to finish the service quickly to get to the next client in line. Her hands were warm, emanating a natural heat that seemed to radiate directly into my tired, cold bones. Her touch was firm, but possessed a frightening delicacy, as if she were handling antique, valuable porcelain and not an aging, tense body. I felt a shiver run down my spine, not from cold, but from an electric sensation I had forgotten existed. The oil she used didn't have that cloying chemical smell of the spa's industrial products, but a subtle, earthy aroma. It seemed like a mixture of sweet almonds with something wild, a scent that reminded me of wet earth and autumn afternoons, far from the city concrete. I inhaled deeply, feeling that smell invade my lungs, and, for the first time in years, my racing thoughts began to slow down. It was as if those hands had the power to silence the incessant noise of my obligations and fears. Jasmine worked in silence at first, but it wasn't an awkward or indifferent silence. It was a silence of absolute concentration and respect. I could hear her breathing, calm and rhythmic, guiding the movement of her hands moving up my neck and down my shoulder blades. She found every knot of tension, every point of pain I hid under layers of expensive clothes and haughty posture. She didn't try to force relaxation. She seemed to invite my body to yield, with a patience I never had with myself. At one point, I felt her fingers trace the path of an old scar I have on my ribs, the result of a botched cosmetic surgery I hated looking at. My immediate instinct was to flinch, ashamed of the imperfection, ashamed of the sagging skin that money couldn't completely disguise. I expected her to divert, to ignore that area as everyone did, pretending the flaw in my armor wasn't there. But Jasmine did exactly the opposite, lingering there with a disconcerting softness. "You carry a lot of weight here, ma'am," she whispered, and her voice vibrated in the air-conditioned room like a warm, velvety musical note. It wasn't a criticism or a technical observation from just any masseuse. It sounded like a realization from someone who saw my soul. I felt an absurd, ridiculous urge to cry, right there, with my face buried in the headrest, vulnerable before a stranger. How could she know the weight wasn't physical, but the burden of a lifetime of appearances? She continued the movements, now moving down to the lumbar region, and I realized her hands weren't just work tools. They were instruments of perception. I felt the texture of her skin, soft but calloused from work, brushing against my thin skin treated with imported creams. That contrast between her vital youth and my artificially preserved maturity caused me a strange vertigo. I felt suddenly exposed, not by the partial nudity, but by the intimacy that prolonged touch was creating without my permission. For the first time, I didn't feel like the wealthy client paying the bills, nor the demanding boss everyone feared. Under those warm, intuitive hands, I was just flesh, bone, and an infinite neediness that hurt more than any inflamed nerve. I wanted her to stop, because the sensation was too intense, but at the same time, a starving part inside me begged her never to take her hands off me. I was being cared for, genuinely cared for, in a way neither of my husbands ever did. Jasmine asked permission to work on my arms, and when she held my left hand, stroking the palm with her thumb, I felt my heart race. She had long, strong fingers, and the way she held my hand wasn't technical. It was almost a gesture of comfort, a silent greeting between two humanities. I peeked sideways and saw she had her eyes closed, concentrated, with a serene expression that made her even more beautiful. What kind of life did that girl lead to have such sensitivity in her fingertips? Time, which I usually controlled with military rigidity, seemed to melt and lose meaning inside that dimly lit, scented room. I didn't know if 10 minutes or a whole hour had passed since she started the transformative session. I only knew that, for the first time in decades, I wasn't thinking about tomorrow's board meeting or the loneliness of my immense house. I was entirely present in my own body, rediscovering sensations I judged dead and buried under the weight of age. When she finally pulled her hands away and covered my back with the warm towel, I felt an immediate physical loss, as if the sun had been turned off. The cold of the room returned, and with it, the reality of who I was and who she was, separated by a social and generational abyss. Jasmine said softly that we were done for today, and her voice broke the spell, bringing me back to the real world. I got up from the table a little dizzy, feeling my face flush for no apparent reason. While I dressed behind the screen, hands trembling slightly as I buttoned my silk blouse, I watched her washing her hands at the stone sink. The water ran down her bronze arms, and she dried her skin with simple, graceful movements, humming a melody quietly. I knew, with terrifying certainty, that I would return the following week, and the one after, and the one after that. I told myself it was for her professional competence, but deep down, as I walked out of there, I knew I was lying. The following weeks turned into an indistinct blur, where the only sharp, colorful things were Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. I, who always prided myself on an impeccable, non-negotiable schedule, began canceling crucial commitments with the ease of someone tossing flyers on the street. Board meetings were delegated to nervous assistants, and lunches with frivolous friends were canceled under the excuse of fragile health I didn't have. The truth was, I was developing an insatiable hunger, not for food or power, but for those 60 minutes of human contact inside a closed room. I became a professional liar, inventing muscle pains that defied any medical logic just to justify my constant presence at the spa. One week it was the sciatic nerve. The next, it was unbearable tension in the cervical spine caused by the imported goose-down pillow. I recited my fake symptoms to the receptionist with the seriousness of a dramatic actress, demanding, with the arrogance of someone paying double, that my schedule be blocked exclusively with therapist Jasmine. No one dared question the rich, eccentric client, and so I guaranteed my weekly refuge. The massage room became the only place in the world where I didn't need to hold up the weight of my own Iron Lady image. As soon as the door closed and the smell of almond oil invaded my nose, my shoulders dropped, and I allowed myself to be just a tired body seeking repair. Jasmine always welcomed me with that same serene smile, never questioning the absurd frequency of my visits or the inconsistency of my physical complaints. She seemed to understand that the therapy there wasn't for muscles, but for something much deeper and more painful that I didn't know how to name. Over time, the respectful silence of the first sessions gave way to shy conversations that slowly filled the void between us. I, who always kept employees at a safe, cold distance, found myself asking personal questions, eager for any detail of that girl's life. I discovered she lived in the South Bronx, took 2 buses and the subway to get to work, and was saving every penny to finish her degree in physical therapy. Her voice, as she told of her daily struggles, held no bitterness or rebellion, just a sweet determination that left me fascinated. While she massaged my feet with touching dedication, I stared at the ceiling and compared her life with that of my own children, raised in a cradle of gold. My children, who had the best schools and private drivers, today could barely keep a job or a stable relationship, always running back to my bank account. Jasmine, with her calloused hands and simple clothes, possessed a nobility of character and internal strength that all my money never managed to buy for my family. That realization brought a mix of admiration for her and deep shame for my own maternal failure. She also began asking me questions, and for the first time in years, someone seemed genuinely interested in my answers and not in what I could offer. She asked about my favorite books, about the trips I took in my youth, about the flowers I grew in my conservatory. There was no financial interest in her voice, just a pure human curiosity that disarmed me completely. I found myself telling stories I told no one, laughing quietly while she undid the knots in my back, feeling light as a feather. There was a day when my cell phone rang incessantly inside my bag, vibrating with the urgency of the outside world I tried to ignore. It was my eldest son, probably calling to ask for another advance on his inheritance disguised as an investment in a shady business. Jasmine stopped her hands for a moment and asked if I needed to answer, concerned, but I told her to continue and let it ring until the battery ran out. In that moment, the warm touch of her hands on my skin was worth more than any empire or any blood tie that only brought me complaints. Intimacy grew in those small moments, creating a cocoon where the 40-year difference between us seemed to dissolve in the gloom of the room. I began noticing details about her that went beyond physical beauty. The small scar on her left eyebrow, the way she bit her lower lip when she concentrated. I memorized every expression of hers as if studying for an exam, storing those images to warm me on lonely nights in my freezing mansion. I was becoming addicted to her presence, to the silent validation she gave me just by being there, taking care of me. Sometimes, an overwhelming urge to give her things took over me. An ancient impulse to solve everything with the unlimited credit card. I wanted to pay for her college, buy her a car so she wouldn't suffer on public transport, give her clothes that highlighted her beauty. But I held back, biting my tongue, terrified at the idea that she might think I was trying to buy her as I did with everything in my life. I didn't want her to feel indebted. I wanted her to like me, Eleanor Vance, and not my full wallet. However, the line between the generous client and the needy woman was becoming increasingly thin and dangerous with each passing session. I started leaving exorbitant tips at the reception, amounts I knew would make a difference in her month, but for me, were pocket change. She thanked me with a shyness that enchanted me, but I saw in her eyes a certain discomfort, a dignity that rejected easy charity, that only made me admire her even more, widening the abyss between the frivolous world where I lived and her concrete reality. Fear began to settle in my chest, the terrible fear that she might get a better job, that she might leave, that she might disappear. I found myself monitoring the spa schedule, suffering in advance for the days I wouldn't see her, feeling withdrawal from her scent and warmth. I, a powerful woman who commanded companies and destinies, was becoming an emotional hostage to a 22-year-old girl who barely knew the power she held over me. It was pathetic. It was dangerous. And it was the best thing I had felt in decades. On one of those afternoons, leaving the spa floating on clouds of temporary relaxation, I noticed the New York sky darkening rapidly. Heavy leaden clouds accumulated on the horizon, promising one of those storms that paralyze the city and turn the streets into rivers. I didn't know, as I stepped into my armored, safe SUV, that the approaching storm would be the catalyst that would definitively break the professional barriers between us. Fate was about to intervene, and I would have no way to run. The rain poured down on the city with biblical violence, turning the streets of Manhattan into rivers of sludge and urban desperation in a matter of minutes. From inside my armored vehicle, protected from the chaos by bulletproof glass and perfect soundproofing, I watched the world dissolve in water. The driver maneuvered with the skill of someone transporting precious cargo, but my mind was far from there, still trapped in the scented spa room we had just left. I felt safe, dry, and untouchable, but a strange restlessness made me drum my fingers on the beige leather of the back seat. Turning the corner of the street near the spa, my eyes caught a solitary shape huddled under the tiny awning of a closed shop, trying to protect herself from the gale. I immediately recognized the silhouette, even hunched and shivering, hugging her own bag against her chest, as if it were a useless shield against the storm. It was Jasmine, the same woman who minutes ago radiated warmth and control, now reduced to a fragile, soaked figure waiting for a bus that certainly wouldn't come anytime soon. Seeing the hands that healed me shaking with cold provoked a painful, immediate oppression in my chest, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Without thinking about the security rules my ex-husband preached so much, or what my driver would think, I gave the order to stop the SUV immediately. The vehicle slid to the curb, and I rolled down the tinted window just enough for my voice to cut through the noise of the torrential rain. She was startled, taking a step back, eyes wide and black hair plastered to her pale face, looking like a lost child, and not the competent professional I knew. I called her name, not as the demanding client, but with an urgency that surprised even me, ordering her to get in before she caught pneumonia. She hesitated, looking at the luxury car as if it were a spaceship landed on the sidewalk, aware of the abysmal distance separating our worlds. I insisted, opening the heavy door and releasing the hot, climate-controlled air from inside onto the frigid sidewalk, an irrefutable invitation in the face of the deluge. When she finally entered, bringing with her the smell of rain, wet asphalt, and that sweet vanilla scent that was hers alone, the space in the back seat suddenly shrank. The car, previously immense and empty, now seemed tiny, charged with static electricity that made the hairs on my arms stand up. Jasmine shrank into the corner opposite mine, apologizing profusely for wetting the imported carpet and light leather upholstery. I wanted to laugh at her concern, wanted to tell her I could buy 10 cars like this one, but I couldn't buy the feeling her presence gave me. Instead, I took a cashmere blanket I always kept folded in the console and extended it to her, in a gesture that brushed our hands together. The contrast between her freezing skin and my warm hand was a thermal shock that reverberated through my whole body, awakening protective instincts I thought were dormant. The trip would be long because of the chaotic traffic, and the silence that settled wasn't one of relaxation, but of a vibrant, palpable tension. I could hear her breathing, calming down little by little, the soft sound of teeth chattering from cold diminishing as the heater took effect. I watched her out of the corner of my eye, seeing droplets of water run down her neck, tracing paths I wished, for an insane second, to dry with my own fingers. The forced intimacy of that moving luxury cubicle was breaking down social barriers with terrifying speed. I asked where she lived to direct the driver, and the address she murmured with shame was on the other side of the city, in a peripheral zone I only saw on the news. The driver frowned in the rearview mirror, but one look from me was enough for him to follow the route without questioning safety or logic. As the car crawled through the gridlock, we started talking, and her voice, hoarse from the cold, filled the sterile environment of the car with a vibrant humanity. We talked about the rain, about the tiring day, about banal things that, spoken there, gained the weight of a confidence. At one point, she turned to me and complimented my perfume, saying it was the most sophisticated scent she had ever smelled in her life, a smell of power and calm. The comment, made with such innocence and sincerity, disarmed me completely, making me blush like a teenager in the back row of a movie theater. I, who used that expensive French fragrance as armor to keep people away, found myself happy that she liked it, that she noticed. I moved a little closer, under the pretext of adjusting the blanket over her shoulders, and felt the heat of her body radiating, mixing with mine. The trip turned into a slow transition between two universes, leaving the wide lit avenues of wealthy neighborhoods for narrow, potholed, poorly lit streets. I saw Jasmine's tension increase as we approached her house, as if she feared I would judge her for the poverty of her surroundings. But all I could feel was a dull anger against the world for allowing someone so valuable to live in such difficult conditions, and a growing admiration for the strength she had to face that every day. I didn't see the degraded landscape outside. I only saw the unbreakable dignity of the woman beside me. When the SUV finally stopped in front of a simple iron gate on a steep street, the rain had slowed to a fine, melancholic drizzle. Jasmine returned the blanket, folding it with reverent care, and her eyes met mine in a silent thanks that was worth more than any payment. For an instant, we stood still, trapped in that gaze, and I felt an overwhelming desire to keep her there, not to let her go out into the cold and the hard reality waiting for her. The tension between us was so thick it felt like the air had become solid. charged with unspoken words and repressed desires. She opened the door, and the cold night air invaded our cocoon, breaking the enchantment and bringing reality back with a dry blow. "Good night, Mrs. Vance," she said, and the use of Mrs. was like a stab, re-establishing the hierarchy we had forgotten during the ride. I watched as she ran to the gate, opening it in a hurry, and waved one last time before disappearing into the darkness of the simple house. My whole body ached with her absence, a phantom pain of an amputated limb I didn't even know I had until she left. The ride back to my mansion was the loneliest journey of my life, surrounded by luxury that now seemed cold, sterile, and meaningless. Her vanilla scent still floated in the car air, a sensory ghost haunting and teasing me. I leaned my head against the cold glass, watching the city lights pass like blurry smears, and understood with terror that I could no longer go back to being just the Tuesday client. That brush of worlds had opened a crack in my armor, and through that crack, Jasmine's light was entering, illuminating corners of my soul I preferred to have left in the dark. The mansion never seemed so silent and oppressive as in the days following that lift in the rain, transforming every decorated room into a cell of solid gold. I needed an excuse, any plausible motive that wasn't my emotional desperation, to bring Jasmine's illuminated presence into my protected world. The opportunity arose in the form of a gold invitation on my desk, the annual charity dinner I hosted for the capital's high society. Normally, I hired a huge, impersonal team to handle everything, but this time, I saw the perfect opening to have her close without raising suspicion. In the next session at the spa, while she worked on my tense shoulders, I made the proposal with a rehearsed casualness that hid my teenage nervousness. I said my housekeeper was sick, that I needed someone trustworthy to coordinate the waitstaff and take care of the final reception details. I offered a payment I knew was unrefusable, the equivalent of 3 months of her salary, masking my neediness with the generosity of a benevolent employer. She hesitated for a second, surprised by the unusual invitation, but financial needs spoke louder, and she accepted with that grateful smile that always disarmed me. The night of the event arrived, bringing anxiety I hadn't felt in decades, a tachycardia that had nothing to do with the 200 important guests who would soon arrive. I looked at myself in the bedroom mirror, adjusting the navy blue silk dress and the sapphires worth a fortune, feeling like an imposter in my own skin. I wasn't dressing up for the social columnists or influential businessmen. I was dressing up for the girl who would be in the kitchen, dressed in black and white. The realization that her opinion mattered more than my entire social circles was a terrifying reality check. When I walked down the marble stairs, the party buzz had already started, with the clinking of crystal glasses and artificial laughter filling the climate-controlled air. My eyes swept the main hall, ignoring empty greetings and air kisses, desperately searching for the only real figure in that theater of appearances. I found her near the bar, organizing trays with serious concentration, wearing a simple uniform that, ironically, made her more elegant than any woman there. No jewelry, no heavy makeup. She radiated a natural beauty that made the surrounding luxury seem vulgar and excessive. I tried to maintain my role as the perfect hostess, circulating among groups, smiling and accepting compliments on the decor, but my attention was permanently divided. I watched with a mix of pride and irritation how Jasmine moved gracefully among people who didn't even bother to look at her face. To them, she was just part of the furniture, an invisible hand serving French champagne. But to me, she was the only point of color in a black and white movie. Every time our eyes met across the crowded room, I felt an electric shock, a shared secret that made my heart race. The hypocrisy of that night began to suffocate me, the contrast between the frivolity of the conversations around me and Jasmine's dignified struggle becoming unbearable. I heard friends comment on trips to Europe and recent surgeries, complaining about tiny problems while drinking wines that cost more than Jasmine's rent. I felt a sudden disgust for that world I spent my entire life building and protecting, realizing how empty it was without true human warmth. I wanted to scream, wanted to kick everyone out and be left alone with the peace her presence brought me. The tension reached its peak when Victoria, An old society acquaintance who prided herself on being blunt and cruel snapped her fingers in Jasmine's direction as if calling a dog. I saw Jasmine's face flush with humiliation, while Victoria complained loudly that the drink wasn't cold enough, using a condescending tone that made me boil inside. Victoria didn't even look at her, treating her like an inferior being whose only function was to satisfy her ridiculous whims. Jasmine lowered her head, apologizing with that humility that broke my heart, ready to run and solve the problem. I didn't think about social consequences or the etiquette governing these events. The protective instinct roared inside me like a lioness defending her cub. I crossed the room with quick, firm steps, the sound of my heels on the floor resonating like warning shots, and stopped beside Jasmine, lightly touching her arm. I looked at Victoria with the coldest smile I managed to formulate, the smile I used to fire incompetent executives, and told her in a low, dangerous voice to watch her tone. The silence that formed around us was instant, as no one expected Eleanor Vance to defend the help. Victoria gaped, stammering a senseless apology, shocked at being publicly reprimanded in my house. I gave no room for replies. I turned to Jasmine and, in front of everyone, asked her to accompany me to the kitchen to resolve an important matter, pulling her out of that line of fire. As we walked side by side away from curious eyes, I felt her hand tremble slightly under my protective touch. I didn't care about the gossip that would arise the next morning. I only cared about taking that expression of fear off her face. We entered the butler's pantry, away from the party noise, and the relief on her face was visible, as if she had just escaped a shipwreck. She looked at me with teary eyes and whispered a shaky, "Thank you," not just for taking her out of there, but for validating her as a human being in front of those people. That look of gratitude and admiration she cast me was worth more than any compliment I ever received in my entire life. There, in the silence of the kitchen, surrounded by silver trays and empty bottles, the boss-employee barrier suffered its greatest crack. I stood there, breathing the same air as her, fighting the insane urge to hug her and promise that no one would ever treat her that way again while I was around. The party continued out there. The world spun with its cruel rules. But in that small space lit by cold light, only the two of us existed. I told her to rest a little, that she didn't need to go back to the hall, that I would invent any excuse for her absence. She smiled, and that simple smile lit up the entire kitchen, making my stomach turn. When I finally returned to the hall to close the night and say goodbye to the guests, I did so with undisguised haste, counting the seconds for the house to be empty again. I knew that when the last door closed and the last engine started on the street, Jasmine would still be there, waiting to finish the service. And the prospect of being alone with her in the immensity of that silent mansion brought a mix of terror and excitement I hadn't felt since my distant youth. The real night was just beginning. When the last imported car crossed the iron gate and silence finally reconquered the mansion, I felt an immense weight lift from my shoulders, as if I had taken off lead armor. The house, previously vibrant with fake voices and shrill laughter, submerged into that solemn quietness I used to hate, but that tonight seemed complicit and full of promises. I took off my high heels right there in the foyer, feeling the cold marble against the soles of my feet, an act of domestic rebellion I would never commit on normal days. I was no longer the perfect hostess. I was just an exhausted woman walking toward the only source of warmth left in that immense house. I walked to the kitchen, following the soft sound of dishes being handled, my heart beating in an erratic rhythm that betrayed my juvenile anxiety. I found Jasmine with her back to me, drying the last crystal glasses with a linen cloth, the yellowish light of the pendant lamp creating a golden aura around her silhouette. She seemed to belong to that place more than I did, moving with a naturalness and peace that transformed my industrial cold kitchen into a real home. I stopped in the doorframe for a moment, just watching, wanting to eternalize that domestic image that seemed like a forbidden dream. She turned upon feeling my presence, and the tired smile she offered me was so genuine I felt my knees go weak. I insisted she stop immediately, leave the mess for the cleaning crew the next morning, as it wasn't fair for her to work until that hour. But she refused with the sweet stubbornness of someone proud of what they do, saying only the crystals were left to put away, and she couldn't leave anything half done. Without thinking much, moved by an impulse to be close, I grabbed a dry cloth and started helping her, ignoring her protests that this wasn't work for the boss. There we were, side by side at the granite island, me in my silk dress worth thousands of dollars and her in her simple black uniform, united by the banal task of drying glasses. The smell of red wine remaining in the glasses mixed with the scent of her skin, that aroma of vanilla and simple soap that, for me, was more intoxicating than any French fragrance. The silence of the house amplified every sound, the clinking of crystal, the rustle of fabrics, and mainly, the broken sound of our breathing trying, unsuccessfully, to maintain a calm rhythm. To break the tension growing like a tide, I poured 2 glasses of the best wine left over and offered her one, transforming the work relationship into something undefined and dangerous. We sat on the high stools at the counter, the kitchen lights dimmed, creating a setting of intimacy that seemed to isolate us from the rest of the world and social conventions. The alcohol and fatigue loosened my usual defenses, and I found myself venting about the emptiness of that night, about how ridiculous I felt amidst those people who only saw my money and position. I confessed to her, voice broken by wine and shame, that I felt like a ghost in my own life, an old, invisible woman desperately trying to maintain relevance. I took off my glasses and rubbed my eyes, not caring if my makeup was smudged, or if the wrinkles around my eyes would be more evident under that light. I wanted her to see the real Eleanor, with all the flaws and insecurities surgeries and Botox could no longer hide. I expected a look of pity or an uncomfortable silence, but what I received was something that shook my foundations. Jasmine set the glass down slowly and turned the stool to face me, her knees lightly brushing mine, sending an electric current through my skin. She looked at me with deep seriousness, honey-colored eyes sweeping my face as if memorizing every detail, every line, every mark of time. She said, with surprising firmness, that I was wrong, that I wasn't invisible, that I was the most magnetic and impressive woman she had ever met in her entire life. "You have no idea of the strength you transmit, nor the beauty you have when you truly smile," she whispered, and the compliment didn't sound like employee flattery, but like an intimate confession. She raised a hesitant hand, and in a gesture of unthinkable courage, touched my face. Her thumb tracing the line of my jaw, with a delicacy that made me close my eyes and sigh. That touch wasn't professional, wasn't therapeutic. It was personal. It was desire. It was a silent adoration I never expected to receive from someone so young and full of life. I opened my eyes and found her face dangerously close to mine. So close I could feel the heat of her breath mixed with the aroma of wine. Time stopped completely in that kitchen. There was no past, no future, no children, ex-husbands, or hypocritical society. There was only Jasmine's mouth, parted and inviting, and my overwhelming need to be kissed, touched, possessed by that feeling I judged dead. I leaned minimally toward her, drawn like a moth to light, my whole body vibrating at a frequency I didn't know. Our noses brushed, a subtle and devastating touch, and I saw her pupils dilate, saw the raw, honest desire reflected in those young eyes. For a second, I believed I could have that, believed I had the right to be happy and feel that fire again. Her hand slid to the back of my neck, fingers intertwining in my loose hair, pulling me gently to close the last millimeters separating us. The kiss was imminent, a gravitational certainty floating in the air charged with that rainy, early morning. But then, the reflection of the two of us in the dark glass of the oven behind her caught my attention, a distorted image that brought reality crashing down on me like an anvil. I saw a 62-year-old woman about to kiss a girl who could be her granddaughter, and panic, cold and rational, took over my chest, expelling the heat of desire. The fear of ridicule, the fear of abusing the situation, the fear of being just a needy old woman taking advantage of a poor young girl's gratitude, all of that screamed in my mind. I pulled back abruptly, almost knocking the wine glass onto the counter, the sound of crystal hitting stone ringing like a gunshot in the silence. I stood up, shaking and panting, murmuring incoherent apologies, running from that moment, running from her, running from myself. I saw confusion and pain pass through Jasmine's eyes, but I couldn't stay there a second longer, because if I stayed, I would yield, and if I yielded, I knew there would be no turning back. I ran to my bedroom like a coward, locking the door behind me, but knowing there was no lock in the world capable of keeping that feeling on the outside. The next morning's light entered my room like a ruthless judge, illuminating not just the antique furniture, but the hangover shame pulsating in my temples. I woke up still dressed in the silk robe from the night before, feeling a bitter taste in my mouth that wasn't just from the wine, but from deep regret for letting things go so far. I got up and went straight to the full-length mirror in the closet, facing my reflection with a cruelty I wouldn't reserve for my worst enemy. What I saw wasn't the powerful, elegant woman society admired, but a deluded 62-year-old lady, desperately trying to hold on to a youth that had drained down the drain decades ago. I ran my fingers over the fine lines around my eyes, those not even the best dermatologist could erase completely, and felt sudden disgust at my own neediness. How could I be so pathetic as to believe a 22-year-old girl, in the prime of her beauty and vitality, could feel something real for me? The voice of my insecurity screamed that what happened in the kitchen wasn't desire. It was just the gratitude of a poor employee, cornered by a rich, needy boss. I felt like a predator, one of those ridiculous old women who buy affection, repeating the same behavior of the men I criticized all my life. Immediately, I grabbed my phone with trembling hands and called the spa, adopting my coldest, most imperious tone to mask the tremor in my voice. I canceled all sessions scheduled for the next month, inventing an emergency trip to Europe I had no intention of taking. The receptionist tried to argue, saying Jasmine had reserved exclusive times for me, but I cut her off abruptly, demanding not to be disturbed. Hanging up, I felt like I had cut the only thread of oxygen keeping me breathing, but I convinced myself it was the right thing to do, the only way to keep my dignity intact. The days that followed were an exercise in solitary torture, where I locked myself in my mansion like a voluntary prisoner of my own pride. I walked through empty halls, avoiding the kitchen at all costs, as the simple sight of the granite counter brought sensory memories of her vanilla scent and the almost kiss haunting me. I tried to read, tried to work, tried to watch TV, but the image of Jasmine's face, lit by soft light and full of adoration, superimposed itself on everything. Her absence hurt physically, a phantom pain installed in my chest refusing to leave with painkillers. I began obsessively analyzing my body in the bath, looking for every flaw, every senile spot, every sag justifying my decision to run. I told myself she would feel disgusted if she saw me naked, without the protection of designer clothes and calculated gloom, that she would see my surgery scars as marks of vanity and desperation. That neurosis became a shield, a way to rationalize my fear of intimacy, transforming the possibility of love into something grotesque and impossible. I was protecting myself from future rejection by rejecting myself first, an old efficient defense mechanism. To make matters worse, friend Victoria called, distilling poison about how she saw that masseuse looking at me at the party, insinuating I should be careful with gold diggers. Hearing that was like receiving a slap, for it validated all my darkest fears that the world saw us as a joke or a scam. I hung up feeling dirty, questioning if Jasmine's sweetness was real or if I, in my abysmal loneliness, had invented a connection that never existed. Doubt is a corrosive acid, and I let it corrode the few beautiful memories we had built. The pain in my back returned with brutal vengeance, the body somatizing the emotional tension of being away from the hands that healed me. I spent sleepless nights tossing in the king-size bed that seemed like a frozen ocean, missing the human warmth I had tasted and rejected. I picked up my cell phone countless times, opening her contact I had saved clandestinely, typing apology messages I deleted immediately after. The pride of Eleanor Vance, the Iron Lady, waged a bloody war against the heart of Eleanor, the lonely woman. I decided I needed to leave Greenwich, flee the city where simple rain reminded me of her, where every corner seemed to whisper her name. I ordered the country house in the Berkshires prepared, an isolated retreat in the mountains, where I could hide from the world and lick my wounds in peace. I packed bags with the determination of someone fleeing a crime, wanting to put miles of distance between my sanity and Jasmine's honey eyes. I foolishly believed the forest air and physical distance would be enough to cure this inconvenient passion. The trip was silent and melancholic, and arriving in the Berkshires, the intense cold only reflected what I felt inside. I spent 2 weeks there, drinking more wine than I should, staring at crackling fireplaces and seeing only ashes. The exuberant nature around me didn't move me. Everything seemed gray and lifeless without the colorful lens her presence lent me. I was punishing myself, and worst of all, I knew I was punishing her too, with my cowardly, unexplained silence. On the 15th day of exile, anger against myself began to give way to unbearable longing and genuine concern. How was she? Did she think she did something wrong? Was she needing the money from the sessions I canceled abruptly? Conscience weighed tons, and her sad image, thinking she had offended me, began tormenting me more than the fear of looking ridiculous. I realized my vanity was costing me the only true friendship I made in years. I decided to return to the city on a foggy morning, heart in my throat, determined to swallow my pride and resume, at least, the professional relationship. I would say I was sick, needed to travel for business, any white lie to justify my disappearance and see her face again. I would be content with the massage, the talk, the smile. I would lock desire in the basement of my mind and be just the generous client. The plan seemed perfect and safe, a way to have her close without the risks of romance. I arrived at the spa that Tuesday afternoon, unannounced, feeling that familiar butterflies in the stomach of someone meeting a secret love. I walked to the reception with my best nothing-happened smile, ready to ask them to call Jasmine and pay any necessary extra fee. But the receptionist's look when she saw me wasn't welcoming. It was a look of contained panic and shame. When I asked for Jasmine, the answer I received made the polished marble floor disappear beneath my feet, throwing me into an abyss of guilt I didn't know how to climb. The receptionist avoided my eyes, pretending to organize papers on the glass counter, while giving me news that fell on my head like a death sentence. Jasmine had been fired 2 weeks ago, right after my sudden disappearance, and a formal complaint sent by a guest from my party. I felt the blood drain from my face when the girl explained, in a low, apologetic voice, that management thought it best to avoid problems with high-level clients. My friend Victoria, in her petty cruelty, called the spa alleging Jasmine had been insolent, and my cowardly silence in the following weeks served as tacit confirmation that I was also dissatisfied. I stumbled out of the spa, not because of high heels, but from the unbearable weight of my own omission that destroyed an innocent person's life. I, who judged myself the protector that night, was the true cause of her disgrace, allowing my insecurity and pride to leave her helpless against the wolves of my social class. I got into the SUV shouting at the driver, ordering him to drive immediately to the address in the Bronx I had memorized that rainy night. I didn't care about safety, schedule, or what people would say. I needed to fix the grotesque mistake I made, or I would never sleep in peace again. The ride to Jasmine's neighborhood seemed endless, a descent into urban circles of hell I ignored from atop my penthouse views. The landscape changed drastically out the window, mirrored buildings giving way to unfinished constructions, exposed wires, and a vibrant, chaotic commerce pulsing survival. I looked at those streets full of struggling people and felt ashamed of my comfort, ashamed of having played with the livelihood of a girl who didn't have the safety net I had. My fear of looking ridiculous had cost the job paying for her college, and that realization was acid corroding my stomach. When the SUV finally stopped on the narrow street she had indicated that night, the driver locked the doors, nervous about the curious stares from the neighborhood. But the house with the iron gate was closed and silent, no sign of life, which sent me into immediate panic. I asked a lady sweeping the sidewalk next door if she knew Jasmine, and she indicated with a suspicious gesture a small beauty salon on the corner down the street. She said the massage girl was doing odd jobs there to pay the month's bills since she lost her job downtown. I got out of the car ignoring my security's protests, walking in my designer clothes over uneven asphalt to the small establishment with the peeling facade. The smell greeting me upon opening the glass door wasn't the soft aroma of essential oils, but the strong, chemical smell of ammonia, acetone, and cheap hairspray. The place was noisy, with a radio playing loud music, hair dryers on, and shouted conversations, the absolute opposite of the sanctuary of peace where I used to find her. My eyes swept the cramped environment, desperately searching for the figure who had become the center of my world. I found her at the back of the salon, sitting on a low plastic stool, giving a pedicure to a client talking on her cell phone nonstop. Seeing Jasmine there, back hunched and expression exhausted, wearing a stained apron instead of the impeccable white uniform, was like taking a blow to the chest. Her hands, those magical hands gifted with healing souls and relieving deep pains, were now reduced to filing calluses for pennies. She seemed smaller, the light in her honey eyes dimmed by fatigue and the humiliation of having taken so many steps back in her journey. I stood in the entrance, paralyzed by guilt, feeling like an obscene intruder with my leather bag worth more than that entire salon. When she lifted her face to grab tweezers, her eyes met mine, and I saw shock run through her body like an electric discharge. She didn't smile. Her expression hardened, transforming into a mask of pain and defense I had never seen before. She asked the client's permission with a trembling voice and stood up, wiping her hands on the apron with nervous gestures, walking toward me like someone walking to the slaughterhouse. We stepped out onto the sidewalk, away from the noise and curious looks of the other employees, and the silence settling between us was heavy and sharp. I tried to start speaking, tried to say I was sorry, but words seemed empty and insufficient before the concrete reality of her firing. She looked me in the eyes, and for the first time, I didn't see the sweet admirer, but a wounded woman demanding respect. She asked, voice broken, if I had come all the way there to finish the job my friend started, or if I had come just to see where the poor devil had ended up. Those words hurt more than any insult, because they contained a partial truth I couldn't deny. I had abandoned her. I took her hands on an impulse, feeling the skin rough and dry from chemicals, and implored her to listen, that I didn't know about her firing until that morning. I explained, stumbling over words, that I had stayed away out of fear of my own feelings, not because of her. I saw confusion in her eyes, the internal struggle between justified anger and the affection she still nurtured for me, despite everything. I confessed to her, right there in the middle of the busy street, that I was a coward, that I allowed gossip to destroy what she was building. I said my disappearance wasn't rejection of her, but rejection of myself, because I didn't know how to deal with the intensity of what I felt when close to her. Jasmine listened in silence, tears running down her face without her making a move to dry them. She let go of my hands slowly and said my fear had cost her college tuition, that my fear had real consequences in the life of someone without a full bank account. That moment of brutal honesty broke the last layer of arrogance remaining in me. I wasn't the savior, I was the disaster. I asked what I could do to fix it, not with money, but with actions, putting myself at her disposal in a way I never did with anyone. I said I wouldn't move from there, that I would sit on that sidewalk if necessary, until she gave me a chance to repair the damage. I was willing to lose social dignity to recover the human dignity she taught me to have. She sighed deeply, looking at the noisy salon behind us, and then at my armored SUV parked on the corner, measuring the abyss between us. Finally, she said her shift ended in 10 minutes, and that, if I wanted to talk for real, without running and without lying, she would accept a ride to a nearby park. That small concession was the lifeline I grabbed with all my might. I waited for her leaning against the peeling wall, under the strong afternoon sun, feeling that, for the first time in life, I was exactly where I should be, waiting for someone worth it. We walked to a secluded concrete bench in the neighboring square, under the shade of an old tree that seemed to protect our conversation from the surrounding urban chaos. Jasmine sat keeping a safe distance, arms crossed over her chest in a classic gesture of self-protection, while I remained on the edge of the bench, feeling like a defendant awaiting the verdict. The afternoon sun began to fall, dyeing the sky a melancholic orange, matching perfectly with the weight in my stomach. I knew this was the moment of truth, and that my usual weapons, money, influence, and arrogance, would be useless there. I began speaking with a trembling voice, tripping over words in a desperate attempt to fix the irreparable. I offered to call the spa owner immediately and demand her rehiring, promised to pay double the salary she received, guaranteed I would cover all overdue college tuition. I was throwing practical solutions at an emotional wound, acting like the efficient businesswoman solving crises with a checkbook, not realizing every financial offer only increased the barrier between us. I was trying to buy her forgiveness because I didn't know how to ask for it any other way. Jasmine interrupted me with a soft but firm gesture, raising her hand to silence my flow of empty promises. She turned her face to me, and her expression wasn't of ambition or relief at the offers, but of deep disappointment that hurt more than a slap. She said calmly that she didn't want my money, didn't want me using my influence to save her as if she were a charity project or a wounded pet. She said she knew how to manage, always knew, and her dignity wasn't for sale. "What I want to know, Mrs. Vance," she said, emphasizing the Mrs. with painful formality, "is why you ran. Why, after that night in the kitchen, where we almost touched for real, did you treat me like I was a contagious disease?" The question floated in the air between us, raw and direct, demanding an honesty I spent my whole life avoiding. She wasn't claiming the lost job. She was claiming the human connection I had brutally broken without explanation. I felt tears burn my eyes. A strange and terrifying sensation for someone who hadn't cried in front of anyone for more than 20 years. The mask of the unbreakable woman, built with so much effort and so many surgeries, began to crack there, on that dirty park bench in the Bronx. I looked at my hands, adorned with expensive rings, and saw them as they really were. Old, lonely, empty hands. There was no way to lie anymore, not to her, and mostly, not to myself. I took a deep breath, swallowing the lump in my throat, and confessed the shameful truth. I told her I ran because I was afraid, a paralyzing, ridiculous fear. I told her that, when I saw our reflection in the oven glass that night, I didn't see two women in love. I saw a pathetic old woman trying to cling to a girl's youth. I said I was terrified she would feel disgusted by me, that she was there only out of obligation or interest, and that I would be the joke of the story, the rich lady fooled by her own neediness. The words came out like emotional vomit, releasing decades of repressed insecurity. I spoke about how hard it is to age in a world that only values the new, about how I feel invisible despite the fortune, about how her touch made me feel alive in a way I didn't feel entitled to be. As I spoke, tears finally overflowed, running hot down my face, ruining makeup, exposing the real Eleanor, fragile and human, stripped of any artifice. I covered my face with my hands, ashamed to be falling apart in public, expecting her to get up and leave, confirming my worst fears. But what I felt next wasn't the sound of footsteps walking away. It was the warm, familiar touch of her hands on my wrists, gently pulling my hands from my face. I opened wet eyes and found her very close, invading my personal space not with judgment, but with overwhelming tenderness. Jasmine didn't feel pity. She was moved. She held my face between her calloused hands, thumbs wiping my tears with a delicacy I didn't deserve. She said, looking deep into my eyes, that I was the blindest woman she knew. She said she never looked at my money or my age, but at the woman who defended her at the party, the woman who stopped the car in the rain, the woman who had a soul she could feel through the skin. She whispered that fear was normal, but I didn't have the right to decide for her what she felt. She said that, in that kitchen, she didn't want to kiss my wallet. She wanted to kiss my mouth. And the only ridiculous thing in this whole story was me believing I didn't deserve to be loved. Hearing that, said with such simplicity and certainty, was as if a dam broke inside me, washing away all the guilt and fear I carried. I held her hands on my face, kissing the palm of each one, in a gesture of devotion and gratitude. I asked for forgiveness, not with expensive gifts, but with an exposed soul, promising I would never run again, never leave her in the dark again. She smiled, that smile making the sun look pale, and said she still had a lot of work to do to make up for the scare, but she was willing to give me a second chance if I promised to be brave. The square around us seemed to have disappeared. City noises were just a distant hum. There, on that simple bench, we sealed a silent pact of beginning again. I asked if she would accept coming with me, not to the spa, but to my house, so we could finish that conversation away from the world's eyes, in a place where I could show her who I really was, without interruptions and without fears. Jasmine nodded slowly, eyes darkening with a promise of intimacy that made my heart race again, but this time not from panic, but anticipation. We got up together, and I didn't let go of her hand as we walked back to the SUV. I knew the return trip wouldn't just be geographic displacement, but the final crossing toward a new phase of my life, where gold armor would stay at the door and only skin, sensitive and real, would enter. The trip back to my house was made in a silence charged with electricity, where the simple brush of our arms on the leather car seat sent alert signals to every nerve in my body. When we entered the mansion, I dismissed the staff with haste bordering on rudeness, locking the front door as if wanting to leave the whole world outside. The house, which always seemed like a cold, too vast mausoleum, suddenly shrank, becoming an intimate, private stage, lit only by indirect lights in the hallway leading to my bedroom. I was trembling, not from cold, but from an overwhelming mix of desire and deep terror of exposing myself completely. In the sanctuary of my room, with heavy curtains drawn against the Connecticut night, the reality of what was about to happen hit me. I walked to the corner lamp to turn it off, instinctively seeking the protection of total darkness to hide marks time and surgeons left on my skin. But Jasmine's hand intercepted mine before I reached the switch, holding my fingers firmly. She whispered she wanted to see me, that she hadn't come all this way to be in the dark, and that simple request was the first test of my courage that night. I left the amber light on, a golden gloom drawing soft shadows in the room, and turned to face her. She approached slowly, with the reverence of someone entering a holy temple, and began unbuttoning my coat with a patience I didn't know. Each button coming loose was a layer of my armor falling to the ground, leaving me exposed not just physically, but emotionally naked before her. I held my breath, sucking in my stomach and straightening my posture, trying to sustain the image of perfection I sold all my life. But Jasmine, with her silent wisdom, placed hands on my waist and pulled me close, pressing her young, warm body to mine, breaking the rigidity of my defensive pose. When the silk dress slid to the floor, leaving only the lace lingerie I used like a second expensive skin, I squeezed my eyes shut, expecting judgment. I knew where all the scars were. Fine lines behind ears, discreet marks under breasts, the C-section scar my children left that I covered with shame. I felt like a map of corrections. A work of art restored so many times originality was lost. But what I felt weren't critical eyes, but warm lips kissing my shoulder, moving down my neck, murmuring words of adoration my cynical brain struggled to accept. Jasmine guided me to the bed, and the role reversal was complete. I, the powerful woman commanding empires, became docile and surrendered in the hands of the girl I once hired. She didn't touch me like the technical spa masseuse. Her touch now was eager, possessive, charged with a hunger making me gasp. She traced my body with fingertips, mapping every curve, stopping on purpose over areas I hated most. When she kissed the scar on my abdomen, I tried covering it with my hand, in a reflex of self-protection, but she moved my fingers and kissed it again, consecrating that mark as part of my story, not a defect. The sensation of her skin against mine was a contrast of textures intoxicating me. The elastic firmness of her youth against the mature softness of my body. Her scent, a natural mix of clean skin and that faint vanilla aroma, invaded my senses, erasing any trace of expensive, artificial perfumes I used to wear. I got lost in the taste of her kiss, a deep, slow kiss, tasting of promise and redemption. For the first time in decades, I wasn't acting, wasn't worried about my face angle, or if the light favored me. I was just feeling, living the moment with an intensity I judged impossible for my age. There was a moment when shame tried to return, when light hit my legs directly, revealing veins and imperfections money didn't erase. But Jasmine, perceiving my tension, looked me in the eyes with fierce intensity and said I was perfect, that every year lived made me more interesting than any 20-year-old girl who knew nothing of life. She made me believe it, not with logical arguments, but with the way her body reacted to mine, with genuine sighs torn from her when my hands explored her back and hair. The intimacy we shared in that bed transcended the physical. It was a dialogue of souls starving for a long time. Me, starving to be seen as a woman and not a blank check. Her, starving to be seen as a safe harbor and not manual labor. Every touch of hers washed away a bit of my cynicism. Every tight hug melted the ice covering my heart. I cried, not from sadness, but from overwhelming relief, feeling tears wet the pillow while she held me firm, whispering everything was okay, that I could let go, that I didn't need to be strong now. We loved each other with an urgency defying time, mixing delicate caresses with passion repressed from months of exchanged glances. The room filled with the sound of our breathing and our names spoken like profane prayers. I felt reborn under her touch, rediscovering zones of pleasure I thought had died along with my youth. Jasmine taught me, that night, that beauty doesn't live in plastic perfection, but in the capacity to surrender and let yourself be affected by another. When the storm of sensations finally calmed, we lay intertwined under Egyptian thread sheets, a tangle of legs and arms. The silence settling wasn't that terrifying void usually inhabiting my mansion. It was a full, warm, comfortable silence. I rested my head on her chest, listening to her young heart beat strong and rhythmic, and felt absolute peace no sleeping pill ever provided. I stroked her arm, amazed at the fact she was really there, hadn't run, had chosen to stay with me. I looked at the clock on the nightstand and saw the early morning was advanced, but I didn't want to sleep, didn't want to lose a second of that magical reality. Jasmine seemed to drift off, breathing becoming heavy, and I stayed watching her sleep, feeling like the luckiest and most terrified woman in the world, lucky to have found that oasis in the desert of my life, and terrified because now I had much to lose. I knew the world out there, with its prejudices and cruel rules, would wake up along with the sun. And as if fate wanted to test my new happiness, I heard a distant noise downstairs, the unmistakable sound of the garage gate opening and closing, followed by heavy footsteps on the stairs. My body tensed instantly in Jasmine's arms. I would recognize those footsteps anywhere. It was my eldest son, Preston, who had a key to the house and the terrible habit of showing up unannounced when he needed money or was in crisis. The bubble of perfection was about to burst, and I would have to decide in a matter of seconds if I would hide Jasmine like a dirty secret or face my own family for her. The sound of the door slamming downstairs reverberated through the room like thunder, shattering the fragile peace we had built in that early morning. Jasmine woke with a start, eyes wide with fright, groping for the sheet to cover her naked body, while survival instinct screamed in my ear to hide it all. My heart raced in a painful rhythm, bombing my chest with ancient shame of being caught doing something bad, as if I were an irresponsible teenager and not the owner of that house. I heard my eldest son's voice resonate through the foyer, calling my name with that arrogant impatience of someone believing the world must stop to attend to him. I jumped out of bed, dizzy and disoriented, looking for my silk robe on the floor with trembling hands, trying to minimally compose the figure of authority he expected to find. I looked at Jasmine, who was already standing, putting on yesterday's simple clothes with humiliating haste, the expression of fear returning to her face, extinguishing the shine of our night. I wanted to tell her to stay, not to hide, but the habit of keeping appearances was a decades-old addiction I hadn't managed to quit completely. I whispered a mute apology and left the room, closing the door behind me, ready to intercept the intruder before he came up the stairs. I found my son in the middle of the living room, pacing with the nervous agitation of someone with gambling debts or legal trouble, situations I had financed so many times. He didn't even notice my pallor or the tremor in my hands. He just unloaded his problems, complaining the credit card was blocked and he needed an urgent transfer to close an unmissable deal. I looked at that 35-year-old man, dressed in designer clothes I paid for, and felt profound existential fatigue, realizing he wasn't there to see his mother, but to visit the ATM. While he talked nonstop about figures and deadlines, his eyes swept the room and stopped suddenly on the armchair where Jasmine's worn bag and cheap wool coat were resting. The silence following was cutting. He frowned, recognizing those objects as foreign to our house's luxury ecosystem, items not belonging to the cast of people frequenting this address. He asked, with a tone of mockery and suspicion, if I had changed the cleaning crew or was receiving charity donations in the living room. Before I could invent a convenient lie, my bedroom door opened at the top of the stairs. Jasmine appeared at the railing, fully dressed, dignity erect despite visible fear in her posture. My son's gaze went up to her, and I saw a slow, malicious comprehension transform his face into a mask of contempt. He looked at her, then at me, then at the time on the wall clock, connecting dots with cruel speed. His expression wasn't moral shock, but elitist disgust, as if finding an insect in expensive dinner soup. He let out a dry, bitter laugh, pointing at Jasmine without the slightest respect, and asked if this was what I was spending his inheritance on now. The phrase hit me like a physical slap. His inheritance. To him, my money and life were just assets waiting to be liquidated for his benefit, and my happiness was an unnecessary expense. He turned to Jasmine and asked how much she charged for the full package, insinuating she was just a gold digger, taking advantage of a rich old woman's neediness. I saw Jasmine take a step back, eyes filling with tears, wounded in the soul by the brutality of those words. The Eleanor of before, the socialite worried about scandals, would have asked Jasmine to leave, calmed the son with a check, and swept the dirt under the Persian rug. But seeing the woman who loved me with such sweetness be humiliated inside my own house, something primitive and fierce woke inside me. The shame I felt evaporated, replaced by limpid, righteous anger. I walked down the last steps with the firmness of a queen, ignoring trembling legs, and stood between him and her, using my body as a shield. I looked into my son's eyes, the same eyes I spoiled all my life, and said in a low, icy voice never to speak to her in that tone again. I said Jasmine wasn't charging anything, was there because I invited her, and she was the only person in that room there for me, and not for what I had in the bank. He tried to argue, shouting I was crazy, senile, that this hood rat only wanted to pull a scam, and I would be a laughingstock in all society. He used every weapon of prejudice, age difference, social class, her origin, trying to diminish me to control me. But every insult he threw only served to make the moral abyss between him and Jasmine clearer. While he screamed for money, she cried in silence for my honor. I took a deep breath and made the hardest, most liberating choice of my life. I told my son the card would remain blocked, and he must leave my house immediately. I said the money was mine, fruit of my work and my divorces, and I would spend it how I wanted, with whom I wanted. If he thought my happiness was a shame, then he didn't need to be part of my life until learning to respect my decisions. I pointed to the door, maintaining gaze fixed on his, daring him to disobey me. He gaped, shocked by the unprecedented rejection from the mother who always yielded to everything. He muttered a few more insults, looked at Jasmine with hate, and left, slamming the door so hard the glass in the cabinet rattled. The final noise of the car starting on the street was the sound of the toxic umbilical cord being cut. The house submerged into silence again, but this time, it didn't seem empty. It seemed clean. I turned to Jasmine, who was still standing at the top of the stairs, clinging to the handrail like a lifeline in a shipwreck. I climbed the steps slowly, feeling the weight of my decision, but also unprecedented lightness. When I got close to her, I didn't need to say anything. She saw in my face I hadn't chosen blood. I had chosen love. She hugged me right there, in the hallway, crying on my shoulder, and I stroked her hair, knowing I had just bought the hardest fight of my life. But for the first time, I had someone worth fighting for. The months following that night of confrontation were marked by a silent scandal sweeping high society, whispered at dinners where I was no longer invited. My phone stopped ringing with invitations to charity parties, and so-called friends disappeared like smoke, proving their loyalty was as artificial as their smiles. However, strangely, social isolation didn't bring the loneliness I feared, but an intoxicating freedom I never knew I desired. For the first time in 62 years, my house wasn't a stage for an audience, but a true home where I could walk barefoot and without makeup. The routine we built together is simple, almost banal in the eyes of those seeking great thrills, but for me, it is the absolute definition of luxury. Jasmine continues studying, now with the tranquility of someone not needing to choose between eating or paying tuition, and seeing her bent over books at the living room table is my favorite view. I didn't become the sugar mommy, as my son predicted with such poison. I became the partner supporting the flight of the one she loves. And she, with her innate wisdom, doesn't let me pay for everything, insisting on splitting small bills with money from her internship, maintaining dignity and balance in our relationship. My appearance changed, not because I stopped caring, but because the neurotic need for perfection lost meaning before the look of adoration I receive every day. I stopped dyeing my hair with that obsessive frequency, allowing some gray to appear, and swapped tight dresses for clothes allowing me to breathe and hug. Jasmine says I look prettier this way, natural, and for the first time in life, when I look in the mirror, I believe her. Scars I previously hid with shame are now just maps of my past, stories she knows and kisses without judgment. We still face crooked looks when walking hand in hand to dinner or walking in the park, the veiled judgment of those not accepting love outside standards. At first, I squeezed her hand tight, tense, ready to defend or flee. But Jasmine taught me to ignore the audience and focus on the stage. Today, I hold the gaze of curious onlookers with a calm smile, daring them to be as happy as I am. I realize shame isn't ours. It's theirs, trapped in their mental boxes while we live fullness. My son still keeps distance, calling only on protocol dates, and that wound still hurts a little, like phantom pain on rainy days. But I learned I cannot sacrifice my life to keep his inheritance intact, or his ego inflated. The family I have today is the one I chose and who chose me, Jasmine, her loud college friends filling my house with laughter on weekends, and the peace I conquered. I discovered blood is a strong tie, but daily love and mutual care are indestructible ties. We traveled to Europe last month, not to the Paris boutiques I knew by heart, but to small villages in Tuscany where no one knew my last name. Seeing Jasmine tasting wines and crying before works of art made me rediscover the world through her eyes, with a freshness wealth's cynicism had stolen from me. It wasn't me introducing the world to her. It was her teaching me to feel the world again. Every shared sunset, every aimless walk, was worth more than any jewel I ever accumulated in the safe. Massages still happen, but now there is no scheduled time, no financial transaction, and no professional coldness of the spa. They are moments of deep connection in the silence of our bedroom, where her hands continue healing pains no medicine reaches. And I also learned to touch, to reciprocate, to care for her tiredness after a long day of studies. I discovered my hands, previously used only to sign checks and hold glasses, also know how to give affection and bring relief. Sometimes, I wake up in the middle of the night and stay watching her sleep, serene face lit by moonlight entering through the open window. Fear of losing her still visits my thoughts. Insecurity about the age difference whispers that one day she might want someone younger. But then she moves in sleep and seeks my body instinctively, and that fear dissipates, replaced by gratitude for the present. The future is uncertain for everyone, rich or poor, young or old, and I decided not to waste today suffering for tomorrow. Eleanor Vance, the Iron Lady, died that rainy night inside the armored SUV. The woman existing today is just Eleanor, vulnerable, happy, and deeply human. The winter of my soul finally ended, melted by the heat of those hands that, without knowing, rescued me from myself. I don't know how many years I still have ahead, but I know each of them will be lived with the intensity of someone who discovered it's never too late to start over. Love didn't save my life. It gave me a life worth saving. And as long as I have Jasmine's touch and the courage to be myself, I know I will be the richest woman in the world, in a way money could never buy.